Now, so welcome to our Tejano virtual event. Today we're going to have a great presentation for you. We have Mr. Breck Morrow, who is an associate professor in the art department here at EPCC, and he's going to be presenting, as you can see on the screen, Light, Shadow, and Time, a brief history of photography. So for attending today's workshop, you will have the opportunity to earn Tejano passport points. So during the workshop, you'll see in the chat that I'll place the code so you can get points for attending today. And I'll share more about this after our workshop. So if you get comfortable, mute your mics, and if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or place them in the chat box. I'll also be putting a link in the chat box again for those Tejano passport points, so be looking for that later on in the workshop. So Mr. Morrow, whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a great summer. At least we're in here nice and cool for this brief moment in time. So today, first of all, let me ask a show of hands. How many of you have love photography or have used or own or do film photography? Photography, not the, well, digital or film, either way. Right. Okay, great. Hey, and well, and photography is a passion of mine. Like Kristen said, I am associate professor at Valle Verde campus. I teach sculpture. I teach photography, which is a passion of mine, and digital media, where we do things like animation and things like that, digital drawing and all. And really, all of these things are a little bit related. Uh, so we're going to talk about the time capsule is kind of the catalyst for all of this, and I'll get to the time capsule later on in the presentation. It's kind of a catalyst because our theme for the time capsule is photography. If you're not aware of the time capsule, I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that later. But the time capsule is in the AST building on the Valle Verde campus. It's actually been there for about since 2019, I believe. And the art department is the caretakers of it starting this last semester. And our first exhibition inside the time capsule is about photography, its history. So, but I'll get to that a little more later. So photography is basically, whether we're talking the very first cameras that came out to the cell phone that you have now, it's about light and the various degrees of light, which we could also call shadow. And it's also about time. What photography does is it captures a moment in time. And we're definitely going to be talking about the history. So we're going to be talking about time since how photography has developed and what it's doing today. So photography begins here, and there's a little white dot in a big dark space. And that's really the heart and soul of photography. It's a dark space with a small hole. In photography, we call that small hole an aperture, but that small hole is what started photography. And it's called a camera obscura. Now, a camera obscura in Latin is known as a dark room or dark chamber with a small hole that lets light in. So the camera obscura, which is not a camera, and I'll get to that here in just a minute. The camera obscura has been known, the phenomena that is created by a dark room and a tiny hole or aperture has been known for over 2,000 years. Mozart, or sometimes he's known as Modi or Master Mo, was a Chinese philosopher. And from about 470 to 391 BCE, he created a school. But he also wrote about, he noticed the science, the actual, what was making this camera obscura, and he wrote about the principle behind the inverted image, and I'll get to that in just a moment as well. But if you're in a dark room and there's no light except for a tiny hole on one side of the room that goes to the outside of the world, you have an image in your that you can see on the back wall. And so he first wrote about this a very long time ago. So he was a thinker. Observation was probably his. He's known for his observation. Things have to make sense to him. So he wrote about that. Now, about 100 years later, Aristotle, whether Aristotle came up with this all on his own or he was a reader of Mozzi, he probably used a camera obscura to look at solar eclipses. And so you can't just look at a solar eclipse without eye protection, but you can actually see what's happening with a solar eclipse if you're using a camera obscura. He wrote about that as well. So the camera obscura goes way back. Now it's kind of forgotten for almost 1,000 years. And then later on, the Renaissance really picked it up, the Renaissance artist. But let's talk about the science of a camera obscura. So basically what we're looking at here is a dark room with a tiny hole, and then outside we have an object, the tree. And what's interesting is that you'll notice that the tree in the outside world is like we see trees. Right side up. But you'll notice inside the box, the dark chamber, the light coming through that hole ends up being upside down and actually flipped horizontally. So it's upside down and backwards. Now, this is the way even cameras work today. Of course, we have different ways to compensate for that. If your cell phone, it's a computer that's fixing that for you. If it's a camera, there's a prism inside of it that causes that lens that causes that to flip right side up. But what happens, and you're probably thinking, why? Why would this happen? Why would the light come in and just show the tree right side up and not flipped? The reason is that light does not like to bend. So light will not bend very easily. There's a couple of ways that light will bend. One of them is with a prism. We all probably are familiar with a prism, how white light hits a prism, and then that prism bends that light, and it bends it in an exponential way so that you get different frequencies that are separated. And that's how we get the colors that come from a prism, because light has different frequencies and there are colors associated with those frequencies. But in a camera obscura, there's no lens, there's just a small hole. And you can actually build one of these, and I'll talk about that here after a while as well. So the basic principle of how this dark chamber, this dark room works with a tiny bit of light revealing the outside world has been known for about a couple of thousand years. And like I mentioned before, the Renaissance artist used the camera obscura for perfect perspective because there's no lens to warp your image. So the light, it's not bending at all. So what's happening is that it's an accurate depiction, although upside down and backwards, it's an accurate depiction of the outside world, the objects outside that you can see. And so a lot of artists, including some very famous ones like Da Vinci and Donatello, used the camera obscura sometimes to get a perfect perspective. And so they would probably have a box if they were out doing a landscape. a big box that they could get in. Once your eyes adjust, you can see the image on the back wall very, very well. Now, this is a photograph of a camera obscura image. This is actually the Pantheon in Rome, from a hotel room that's across the street. This is a famous one from Abelardo Morel in 1999. It took about 5 to 10 hours to create this because it's so light, and he was using film cameras at the time. And the exposure time, and some of that will make sense later, what exposure time means. But the film took a long time to capture the image. So you can see it, but to get it captured, which we're going to find out has been the hardest thing that in history when we're trying to save an image. And so a camera obscura does not save an image. It just puts it on the wall or the back surface of a dark chamber. And so no one could ever figure out how to capture that. And that was the big question about photography forever. Now, let's talk about capturing that and making the photograph. But before I do, I want to ask, are there any questions so far? Anything that I could explain further, or something that might have popped into your mind? Okay. All right. Well, anytime, just let me know. Okay, so let's talk about, like I say, the dark chamber does not capture an image. How do you do that? How do you capture an image? This actually is the oldest photograph that we know of, an image that has been captured. Now, when we say captured, we're meaning that we can save it for later and share it with other people. Eventually, you would be able to make lots of copies of it, just like we do with our cell phone. Now, Joseph Niepce was a tinkerer. He kind of spent his family fortune on trying to figure this out. What you're looking at is a view from his window of his lab, and it took about 8 hours exposure time to create this. Now, this was a one-off, and they didn't last very long. This one, he finally got to this point where he could actually have it last longer. And of course, it's really not all that high quality, right? It was completed on a pewter plate, so a square piece of metal that was pewter, and that pewter had been treated with chemicals, with salts. And this particular one was actually treated with a sodium plus a petroleum type asphalt, a little similar to what you drive your car on. But he discovered that that chemical makeup was sensitive to light. Now, it wasn't super sensitive to light because it was an 8-hour exposure, but it did capture it. And so we're going back to 1826. So photography as we know it today, that can be captured and shared with others, is only about 250 years old. Excuse me. So this is the beginning. He kind of started this, the whole scientific, and it really was science. Chemists were involved. In fact, Niepce was a chemist. And so he was fascinated on how could we take a camera obscura image and keep it. Now, just a few years later, within 12 years, you can see that photography had advanced quite a bit. The other big figure, or I should say another big figure in the development of photography in the 19th century, was Daguerre. Louis Daguerre came up with different chemicals that would allow you to make an exposure that in much less time. This particular exposure only took about 8 minutes. So you can see that we're kind of moving in that direction of taking a faster image. Now, this is also known as one of the first images of a human being. And I don't know if you've noticed him or not, but there's a person right down here getting his, there's actually two people, but I think a post is kind of in front of the other guy. But he's getting his shoe shined. This is in Paris. And so for 8 minutes, I guess if you're standing there long enough, not moving too much, he's a little blurry because he probably was moving slightly. The light hitting the chemical plate, and this happened to be a silver plate. It was a copper plate that was silver coated with some different kinds of salts on it, chemistry. And they were much more sensitive to light. So the exposure time was cut down to about 8 minutes. But even though it was cut down to 8 minutes, what we're not seeing in this image is that boulevard there, that the street happened to have people walking, horses and carriages going up and down the street, but they didn't register on the photograph because they were moving too fast. So the light reflected off of them, just like we saw reflected off the tree in the camera obscura. The light reflected off of them was not in the same place long enough to expose the medium, meaning the plate, which would have been. Now, this was a direct positive, and this will make sense in a while. It wasn't an actual negative where you could make more. That would come from our next icon in the 19th century. And his name was William Henry Fox Talbot. He was also a scientist and inventor. Now, he developed the negative. And it wasn't too many years later that he developed a negative that from the image that we just saw from Daguerre. Now, what's the significance of having a negative? Well, the significance is that a negative, if you make a negative, you can make as many positives as you want from that negative. And Talbot worked out a way called the calotype process to be able to do that. Sometimes he would do these on glass plates. He would treat the glass plate just like a little piece of glass, and then expose it to light, an object, and then it would create this opposite of our positive, of what was happening in the world. So this was a really huge breakthrough in photography in the 19th century, because it is still done today. The same basic process, different chemicals, much more modern technology. But when you make one copy that's a negative, you can make as many positives as you want and share those. And you can imagine, if you're thinking about photography for newspapers, photography for artwork, photography for any kind of process that you might want to sell your work or have multiples of the same thing. If you took a portrait and everyone in the family wanted a copy, you could do that. Before that, you could not do that. It would be just a one-off. You would get that positive, and that was it. Now, this wasn't a clean, clear progression. Everyone was sort of working on this all at the same time. And I'm sure information was shared. Of course, there was no internet at the time, and so information would find its way around the world. And so a lot of these progressions in the photography technology. A little bit of it was sharing. All of it is that everyone was interested in approaching it in a different way. Now, the long exposures were a problem. Even with Talbot's negative, it took a long time. And its portraits became very, very popular. Can you imagine never seeing a photograph of yourself or your loved ones at all? And then all of a sudden, now you have this little keepsake. And most of the portraits from the 1840s to the 1860s, 70s were very small, and they were positive. So people would go to a studio. Studios popped up everywhere, all over the world, starting in Europe. And people would go, put on their Sunday best, and go and have their portraits taken. And then that would be a family heirloom. It would be a keepsake. It was something that was the technology was so new. It was so popular and so fascinating to the public. Now, the long exposures, again, were a problem. And you'll notice this gentleman sitting in the chair. He's got this apparatus behind him holding his head still. That was very common for photography studios in the 50s to the 70s, because if you move slightly, you had a blurry image. And so, because even though exposure times came down to something like a couple of minutes, even a minute, or even 30 seconds, can you imagine holding still for a couple of minutes to have your picture taken? I mean, not move at all. And interestingly enough, most people having their photographs taken at this time in the 1840s to 70s were coached by the photographer not to smile. And so that's why you will see a lot of these old photographs of people not smiling. And you kind of think, well, everybody's grumpy back then, or they're super serious. But actually, it was because it's so hard to hold a smile for that long. So it was much easier to have a relaxed face and be very still. And so it was kind of a practical aspect of portrait photography at the time. Now, this is this is the first known portrait in 1839. You'll notice he's not smiling, and it has degraded. Still, I mean, we're talking 1839, so it was still very experimental. Photography capturing the image had only been known how to do for about 12 years. So it was still new. So quality wasn't as good, but probably most of this the problem with this image is that it's probably been damaged over the years. Most of the time, these older images have to be kept in either behind a UV rated glass or in the dark, or in a book, in between pages, just something to keep light from making them fade. They were very fragile, and they could easily be scuffed up, which it looks like this one might have. But 1839, we're going way back there. This is the first portrait of a woman. Much better photography process. And this was, again, she's not smiling. But what's fascinating about photography is it freezes that moment in time. Much different than, say, a painting. A painting is going to have subjective editing, subjective imagery from the artist. But a camera doesn't really tell the truth, and it doesn't lie. It's just a snapshot in time. It's taking that moment in time and then since we could capture that, you have it forever. I threw this in because it's very interesting. Hannah Stilley was born in 1746. So here she's 94 years old, and she had her photograph taken in 1840. Can you imagine in 1746, before the Revolution, goes way back. So I'm sure that the photography was quite an interesting technology to her. This is the first known photograph of a president. John Quincy Adams. He was the son of John Adams. And this was in 1849. He was born in the 1700s as well, of course. It's interesting. He looks contemplative. I think it was a great pose. Excuse me. But again, it's a moment captured in time. The very first president that we can see a photograph of. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see a photograph of George Washington? We just came about 40 years too late with our photography. Now, portraiture became popular, like I said, from about 1840 to the 1870s and really beyond. But there was an explosion of it. And some photographers were pretty high profile. This photographer was named Nadar, and he just went by Nadar. And he photographed famous people. One of his most famous was Sarah Bernhardt. She was a world famous actress, singer, and it's a very artistic portrait. I think it's one of the first artistic portraits that we have in existence. And what makes it artistic is her gaze, her look. Also how she's presenting herself. She's looking straight into the camera, head down a little bit. It's very introspective, and it makes you a good portrait in art makes you think about what the person is thinking. You want to know what they're thinking. It's more than just a document of here I am. Let me take I keep cracking up here. I'm going to have a little bit of water. So we can see that the possibilities of portraiture begin here with Nadar. It's a little bit like many of the poses that one of our contemporary world famous portrait artists, photographers is Annie Leibovitz. And I'll mention her here in a little bit. And so when we look at portraits that are a little bit like this one or this one, it doesn't quite have the same artistic feel as when we're looking at something like this. So I like to tell my photography students that 15 minutes after photography was invented, artists were like, wow, what can I do with that? And so the creative mind picked up on the technology very early, in spite of the fact that the art world, quote unquote, at the time did not view photography as true art or as an art medium. We do today, but for about the first 100 years of photography, it was kind of looked at side-eyed by the art world. They didn't really accept it until the beginning of the 20th century. Again, Julia Margaret Cameron here in 1872 using photography, creating an image, Angel of the Nativity. So she sets up, have the wings as a prop, and then poses the child and takes the photograph. Again, an artist using Photography. Interestingly enough, and you probably wouldn't know this, well, you just can't tell looking at the image. She took this in a chicken coop. So kind of interesting. Of course, she narrated where and moderated where this was going to be taken and what was going to be seen by putting up a cloth behind and all. But apparently she liked the light in there, and she created this in a chicken coop. Another example of photography and art, and this is kind of like the 19th century photoshopping. This Oscar Rielander, most of the time known as Gustav Rielander, created this with 32 negatives. So we talked about a negative before. So he took all of these images, most of these people together or in small groups, and then in the darkroom, he carefully added them to the same positive. So it looks like everyone was in the same place. And again, I'll mention this a few times, is that photography does not tell the truth and it does not lie. So now it's just the artist or the photographer's intention. Meaning that those images of these people here are true representations of them and how they were seen when the camera went click. And then the artist chose to put them all together and make it as if they were all together. This is one of the first aerial photographs. It was taken from a balloon in 1860. The first photograph of a tornado, which, by this time in 1884, you could take a much faster photo. And so they were able to get it. Had this been 20 years earlier, they probably couldn't have captured the tornado because the tornadoes do not stand still. Again, the first photograph of lightning. Probably so bright that it burned it in no matter what your exposure time was. Now, we probably think of color photography. When I think of things going from black and white to color, I always think about The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy walks out of the house that was picked up by a tornado, and she's in Oz, and everything's in black and white. She opens up, and all of a sudden, in an instant, photography or everything was in color. That's not exactly how photography worked. We would probably think 1861. Why were they still shooting movies in black and white in the 50s? And one of the reasons is that a lot of these things were developed and experimented with, but they weren't really practical. This was a very unpractical process where they had to use 3 different negatives. So they would take the same photo 3 different times with different chemistry, giving you a blue, yellow, and red. And then they would overlay those to create the color image. But still, they were able to do it. It just didn't become like every day until at least about 100 years later. This was actually a similar process in 1877. It's the first color landscape. 3 negatives were used to create it. So landscape was pretty easy to create because it didn't move. And so at least as long as there wasn't wind or something like that. So you would be able to take a photograph 3 different times and then put those 3 different colored negatives together to get your image. Now, I think we had a question here. The very first color, let's see. Um, oh, what the very first, okay, yes. So it is kind of interesting, right? It's a ribbon. It's a ribbon that was kind of, I guess it was plaid. It was kind of a plaid ribbon. So it's probably bright colors that they wanted to use. And so they used that as a test. I'm sure it took forever to set this all up, much experimentation, trying to get different chemicals to produce different colored negatives. But they used, I think it was a ribbon. I don't know if it was for gift wrapping or if it was for wearing, but it was a ribbon. Good question. Thank you. Any other questions before we move on to this little next segment? Okay. Now, most of the photographers in the 19th century were a lot of times they considered themselves scientists, engineers, academics. They were people experimenting with these, and then along comes portraiture, and then they were businessmen, and so they had to plop down some money for these things or build them themselves. They had to create their own dark rooms. They had to create everything, and a lot of these cameras were not exactly what you would stick in your pocket and carry with you. Some of them could weigh over 100 pounds. So they weren't really something that everyday people used. And so most of the time, well, until about the 1880s, if you wanted a photograph taken and you were not a photographer who had their own business and that kind of thing, you had to go to a studio and get it taken or pay a photographer to take a photo. So, and as you can see in this photo, some of those would have been, they had to lug these things around. There were usually a couple of guys and a photographer with an assistant, and they would go and set up for certain things. It wasn't until about 1888 that Kodak, William Eastman, George Eastman, who came up with the Kodak, you're probably familiar with the camera and film, came up with this small box. It was only about 8 inches by maybe 12 by 8 by 8 by 12. So it was pretty small. And he created this specifically for the public, for the consumer. In 1888, he created this camera, and you bought the camera, and it was already loaded with film. Now, film was a new technology as well. Before, when a photograph was being taken, it was on a plate or a glass plate or a metal plate, and you had to lug around all that stuff all the time, and there were different parts and pieces. There wasn't really something compact like the cameras we know today. And even though it was about 12 inches by 8 by 8, that's still pretty small. You could just stick that under your arm and walk out. And it came loaded with 100 images on a roll of film. Now, what you would do is take those images. Once you got all of your image taken, you sent the whole camera back to Kodak. They would take the film out, develop it, send you the images, reload your camera, and they'll send you the images and the film and the new loaded camera back to you. So you can see how that would be really appealing to a lot of people. Now, these cameras cost about $25 in 1888, which you probably think, wow, $25, that's pretty affordable. But if you adjust for today's dollar, that was about $870. So it was, even though it was fairly affordable for the wealthier folks, it wasn't really for the masses. That wouldn't come until later. And of course, in 1888, that was a huge breakthrough. Now, I've been talking about film and developing and the darkroom process. But when I say darkroom process, we have a darkroom on at Valle Verde. There's also one at Trans Mountain. Both photography is taught at both of those. I teach at VV. So if you're talking about film photography, you're talking about a camera that has film inside of it. You shoot the rolls of film, then you have to develop that film. So that film has to be developed in a protective dark space. And then you have negatives. Going back to our Henry Talbot back in the 1840s, you have negatives. And then you take those negatives, put them into what we call an enlarger. It's kind of a projector that shoots vertically with a light behind it. And that light creates that image onto a light sensitive paper, which we call photography paper. And then you take that, you still can't see the image on the paper, but then you run it through a developer and instantly the image comes up and it's just like magic. It's just, wow, you know, that's amazing. I took that out in the world, I developed the negative, and now I've got it on my paper. Now that developer will keep the image developing unless you stop it. And so what we call a stop bath is a different set of chemicals. You put it in a tray, do that for about 30 seconds, and then you fix it. And when we use a fixer, what that does is set the chemicals so that they don't fade over time. And that's the basic process and has been the basic process for about 150 years. So the process of film photography is this process right here. Any questions about the process? Okay, let's move on. Come take the photography class, and you'll have a lot of fun and join in on the magic. Now Kodak, George Eastman, his cameras started getting smaller and a little more sophisticated. We're starting to see cameras look a little bit more like a camera. They started out as a that first camera that we saw there was called a Brownie. This is a Brownie 2 up here in the upper left corner. A Brownie 3 is in the middle. And then we start moving to, with a different company, Lights created a camera that looks a whole lot like the cameras we have today. And then eventually we get down here to the Pony camera, Kodak, going back to George Eastman. They came up with an SLR, which is a single reflex camera. So it's a single lens reflex camera, meaning when you look through the viewfinder there, when you hold that camera up to your eye and you look through that viewfinder, you can see the image as it's going to be on your film. Before, if we look at these two cameras at the top and also the one in the bottom, the Brownie at the bottom, you can see that you basically just had to point it and sort of guess that you got it right. Now they did start putting a few, there's a tiny little viewfinder on this middle one at the top. It's on the front here, but it wasn't built into the camera. So we can start to see the evolution here. You can almost see it physically, how it gets to a Pony camera, which is going to be in the 1950s. And interestingly enough, you can go see a Pony and the first Brownie that we saw back here in the time capsule. There's an actual authentic Brownie in the time capsule. And then there's a Pony as well with many other cameras. me see if I can get my mouse to work down here. Okay, so we can kind of see this evolution from 1910 to 1950. And film would go in all of these cameras. Interestingly, I'll mention the Brownie at the bottom. It was a Brownie Hawkeye. It became one of the most famous cameras in the world during the 30s. And you'll notice that it looks a little different. It's an actual, back in the 30s, there was an art movement called Art Deco. And so everything consumer-wise was Art Deco. Art was, there was a lot of Art Deco in architecture, a lot of objects, toasters, whatever, there was Art Deco. The camera was the same way. And it was a super popular because it was very, very light. You can actually see a Brownie in that, in the time capsule as well. I've put in 2 different Brownies of my own. And it was just, you can tell it's kind of compact, just a small little box, about the size of a grapefruit. And you could load your own film. You could send that film off, get it developed, get it back. In the 1930s, photography was just full on commercial, where people could, the consumer could buy them and use them. Now in the 60s to the 80s, we probably have all seen these kind of cameras. Some of you, if you've taken, if anyone's taken a photography class, we have these in our photography program. People donate them all the time. I beg for them and ask people to donate them because they're getting harder to find. But it's amazing. Amazing people have donated some wonderful cameras. Almost all of these that you see, we have an example of. Now, the Japanese Revolution, the reason I call it that is after World War II, Japan started manufacturing. They really got into photography, and they started developing better technology, smaller cameras that could do a lot, have different exposure times, have different shutter speeds. And so they just exploded all over the world. Everyone had a camera in the 60s, and they were pretty affordable. They were still pretty affordable, and they take beautiful images. My students still use them. And then, of course, finally, with camera technology, I shouldn't say finally, because we do have cell phones, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. We trade our film for a digital sensor. So instead of film rolling across in front of your lens and then you snapping the shot, letting the light into your little tiny dark room that is your camera, you do the same thing, except for a digital sensor captures that image. Now, when they first came out back in the 90s, for the consumer, we're going to talk about how old, it's going to surprise you how digital technology is. But when it was for this consumer, you could buy a 1 megapixel camera from Kodak, and it cost you about $1,000. And it just took a 1 megapixel image, which was not all that great. But it was amazing because you could take about 12 to 24 1 meg images. Then you had to dump them off the camera. But it was amazing. You didn't have to have a dark room. You didn't have to have film, all of the equipment. You could just shoot your image. Now, as I mentioned, digital photography is much older than I even knew. I was surprised when I first discovered how old digital was. I thought, well, you know, maybe they were tinkering with it in the 80s, and then they kind of started really figuring it out in the 90s. No, in 1957, this is the very first digital photograph. Russell Kirsch, one of the scientists working at the lab at the National Bureau of Standards, created this image of his 3-month-old baby boy. Um, and it took quite a while, just like film photography, to make this image. It was more of a scanner in a way than it was an actual digital sensor like we have today. But still, it began there. And if you kind of compare Kirsch's first digital image to Neep's first image of outside his window in 1826, the quality is a little bit similar, right? But the point is that they did it, and that started a new technological revolution. I mentioned Danny Leibovitz before. This is a digital photographer, and well, she also does film. She shoots famous people a lot like Nadar. I mean, she's shot just about everyone famous in the world. They seek her out, from the Queen to Michael Jackson to all kinds of people. I think people gravitate to her. Maybe they also did to Nadar because she can pull out that introspective aspect of self-portrait. She could make it interesting, make people wonder what you were thinking, see more to you than just your face. And this is kind of there's a lot of movement in this portrait. Her gaze is piercing. It's just a beautiful image, right? And it does make you think that we want to know more about what she's thinking. Now, also, you can see that the quality is much improved from that 1957. And of course, our cell phones do an amazing job with our 24 megapixels or whatever. Some may even have more now. Any questions before I go into this? I've got just a few more here, about 15 more slides. Does anybody have any questions before we keep going?
Yeah, I'd just like to let everyone know I've put the app for the Tejano Passport Points in the chat. If you're able to stay on a little bit over, please do so. But I've also put the link into the chat for those of you that are interested. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Kristen. Okay, so let's talk real quick about photography for change. So what you can do with photography, and you can do this with your cell phone. We already know cell phone photography has changed a lot. Just think about a few years ago how the cell phone images and video, which is a photography, of say George Floyd changed the whole world. How the cell phone photography at various famous events have made change for the world. Lewis Hines in 1908 took this photo of a 10-year-old worker. He went undercover as an inspector in cotton gins and cotton mills in different factories in the South, because he was concerned about, and the government was also concerned about, child labor. Being a spinner, this 10-year-old was a spinner, so the reason a lot of these companies down there wanted children is because their hands were small and they could reach into machinery if there was a clog or something tied up. But it was dangerous. So kids were losing fingers or arms or hands or sometimes their life. Plus they were underage. And so he went undercover, took this photo and many more, and took them back to Washington. And it created the child labor laws. It helped create that, the evidence. So the photograph was a powerful tool for change. And of course, we probably have all seen this. One of the most famous of the 20th century, Dorothea Lange, took this in 1936. She was also working for the government, for the Public Works Department. And So she was in California, and she took this photo of a migrant mother, and it became the most iconic image of the 20th century, especially during the Depression era, because so many migrant people, you know about the Dust Bowl days, the Depression, people moving to California for work. Many people would end up in camps, and this lady did as well in close to Chico, California. Ended up in a camp, and Lang took this photo, sent it back into Washington, and it went quote unquote viral for the day. It was a viral image for its day. It hit the newspapers all over the country, and it helped create a program for government aid to help the migrant workers during the Depression. I'm sure we're all familiar with the demonstrators march from Selma to Montgomery, and then, of course, the chaos that ensued there at the bridge. But this is also, it was led by Martin Luther King, the march, and this was one of those images that helped bring awareness to the cause for rights. So the civil rights of African Americans. So again, photography making a change. This particular image helped sway public interest in the Vietnam War. It's by Nick Ut from 1972. A girl who had her village was hit with napalm. Burned all of her clothes off and burned her all over. It's a famous image. They're running from the napalm. You can see all the smoke in the back, terrified children. And the public in America were outraged about this. And it helped convey the horrors of war and started the beginning of the end of the Vietnam War for America. This is a famous image from Kevin Carter. It actually won a Pulitzer Prize. There's a backstory to it, but when it first came out and when it got the Pulitzer Prize, it helped bring some change for U.S. aid to Sudan and other African countries where children were starving. Now, this looks like it might be abandoned. Remember, I said that a photograph doesn't lie and it doesn't tell the truth. So we're actually seeing what was there, but the context is a little bit different than what. Now, Carter wasn't trying to fool anybody, but he's actually standing up against a bus. This little girl and her mom just got off the bus. He was on a bus traveling with other people. They had a break. Across the street was a gas station, and this little girl was out there playing, but she was also a little cranky, probably tired, might have been hot, was playing. And so she, at a moment when she leaned down, there happened to be a vulture back there as well. And so he snapped the shot. It's a powerful image, and it did create change. Even though maybe the context was a little more different, it wasn't necessarily remote in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on here to photography and new frontiers. Just a few slides here. In the 90s, the Hubble came out. It is a space telescope, but it has a huge camera on it. Not the largest camera. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's a new frontier. So photography is showing scientists today what we had no idea existed before. And then the images are just fascinating. So we're pointing our camera to the universe and discovering more and more things. Let me get my mouse down there. My mouse is a little frozen. Here we go. Okay. Next came the James Webb in 2021, shooting even further. Now, when we talk about light and shadow and time, time is something here that is being captured. We're looking further and further into space with the more powerful cameras that we have now. So photography, I'm sure that Neebs could never have imagined that we could be looking into time, not just capturing time, but looking back further into time, into history. And just this year, about 2 weeks ago, some of these first images of the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile released some images, and we're looking even further into time. We could not see these images with any of our other photographs, telescopes, and cameras. Now, this is probably the largest camera in the world. It's about the size of a car. It's attached to an almost 27-foot lens. Amazing, right? And it's 3,200 megapixels. So we can see really sharp images compared to, say, our cell phone cameras that take about 12 to 24. And of course, we finally arrive at our camera that you carry every day. We probably think about this in lots of ways, shooting selfies, shooting our food, shooting the places that we are. But actually a camera, it's a camera, and a camera is a camera. So as you can see, the way that we use our camera is the most fascinating thing. And so you have actually the technology and the power to capture an image at any point in time that you want. And so what I'm going to share with you is a project that I do with students, sometimes in my art appreciation, sometimes in photography. I call it the marvelous and the mundane. And that's finding things that we don't notice every day. Taking your cell phone and using macro photography, macro meaning big, so you're shooting something small and making it big, and it kind of changes the context of it. It brings it more into the realm of art. And this is some of the student work that I've had students do. And it just creates an interesting image. It's a great creative tool, and you've already got one, I'm sure, in your pocket or purse or on your person. And instead of just always using it for your food or selfies or landscapes and things, I would like to challenge you to go out, take your camera. This is actually another photograph that one of my students took, which is just lovely. And I'm trying to remember what that was. I think it was a up close photo of a pottery that had an interesting texture. So if you're interested in how to take a macro photo, you just want to make sure that your images are in focus. So you zoom a lot. You want to make sure you have good light. You also want to make sure you're not standing in that light to create a shadow, which is easy to do. You want to look for interesting textures, interesting colors, interesting patterns. And anytime you focus on something and get something very small to make it larger, you notice new things, things that you might not have noticed before. And it's a great way to experiment with the camera that you have in your pocket and that you can use every day. And you can remember that that camera is built on the technology throughout the last 250 years that we've been talking about. The last thing I'm going to mention here is the time capsule. Invite everyone to go over to the AST building at the Valle Verde campus. You might notice some of the cameras that you just saw are in there. You can there's a video that is showing some of the same slides and much more. There are El Paso photographs of, I call it then and now. So photographs from when EPCC was very new. So they're black and white photos from the 60s and 70s of students and teachers and campuses. And then we also have a comparison of new photos from students and teachers and campuses. So it's an interesting, there's some text that explains a lot of it. So if you just would like to go and spend a little time looking up close to any of these cameras. And I also will throw out there that if you are interested in actually touching or holding one of these, I'd be happy to meet with you over there, especially during the semester. And I'll open it up and you can take a look at the cameras. You can also come over and visit in the A building, the dark room. Just get in contact with me and I can show you around if you're interested in photography or taking photos. We do both film and digital photography with an art kind of slant. Some of the images from the inside of the time capsule here. And finally, when you pull out your camera, and I hope you do, to make some macro photography, find those marvelous things that you may not see or walk by every day and never really noticed. Because art is about seeing that light, seeing that shadow, and taking the time to actually see it and capture it. So with that, I'm going to end this. Are there any questions that I can answer or comments? Thing you would like to share?
Well, this has been really great. I love this overview that you've provided us on photography. Learned a lot, and it's really impacted our lives a lot. So thank you for sharing all of this information.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're welcome, Becky.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you being here with us and sharing all of this information. I do invite everyone to go out to the ASD to see that time capsule display they have. You can see some of these cameras and photographs that he's been mentioning, and maybe meet with him to discuss the dark room that they have over there. That would be really interesting. So hopefully you'll take advantage of that opportunity. So thank you again, Mr. Morrow. We appreciate you for being here today with us.
Thank you. And you all have a great summer. I hope to see some of you in photography class.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And so thank you all also for coming. Again, I put in the chat, you do have a link to get some Tejano passport points, which is where you can get proof for your attendance today if you need that, as well as earn points towards getting a medallion. Next Friday is July 4th, so we're not going to have a workshop on that day, but you can join us the following Friday on July 11th for a presentation by our financial aid program. So again, thank you for coming, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Take care.